What's up, guys? Josh here, and today we're going to be talking about the greatest pattern in existence, the greatest symbolism that you can find, both within the context of history and symbolism and pattern recognition and archetypes and psychology. But also at the level of the individual. This is the most vital pattern that you can understand in reality and apply to your life in a way that can help you achieve the highest, embody the highest things, and become, you could say, the best version of yourself, the version of yourself that is able to serve the best, as many people as possible, in the best way as possible. And that pattern is the pattern of sowing and reaping, and also the pattern of sacrifice. So what we're going to be going over today is a couple legends from Alexander the Great, the symbolism of sacrifice in the Old Testament of the Bible, Cain and Abel. We're going to talk about Christ's ultimate version of this pattern and the results, right? The reward for that pattern. And we're going to talk about how that can apply at the level of the individual, at the level of society, so on and so forth. We're going to talk about sacrifice in terms of attention and body and energy. And we're going to talk about griffins, which griffins and hybrids and cherubim, they're very fascinating, and they have a lot to do with this pattern. So we're going to dive right into that. So the pattern of sacrifice, the pattern of ascending, descending, you could say, the pattern of karma, you could call it. I call it reaping what you sow. That which you sow, so also shall you reap. I'm going to read a passage here from Pageau's book. Really good book, The Language of Creation. Jordan Peterson had an interview with Matthew Pageau, where they discussed this book in detail. I'd highly recommend that video. Check that out. You have this diagram showing the mechanics, so to speak, of sacrifice, how this works. So he says, the main purpose of the altar was to consume flesh below and raise it into heaven as smoke. This transaction should be understood as a form of cosmic taxation by which parts of the flesh were allotted to the priestly hierarchy while others were carried further up into heaven. In general, the altar was the place where taxes in the form of flesh, food, and even money were offered up in exchange for leadership from heaven in the form of revealed information or light. So this is a beautiful concept, an absolutely amazing pattern, because this is what we experience on a regular basis. This is what we do when we work. Work is essentially sacrifice. It's sacrificing for the future. And beyond that, it is a creation of space. You know, you have this cosmic tug of war between time and space, order and chaos. And what you do when you work is you create space. You create order. You draw order out of chaos, and the energy that you expend, the time that you expend, is a form of sacrifice that you could say goes up to heaven, and the response is the descending of the divine to meet you, and you have a joining of heaven and earth. Pageau says, on the opposite end of the temple, the purpose of the tent was to materialize breath. Another way to put that is to materialize spirit, right? That what he's talking about specifically is the pneuma, which can be translated into breath, wind, or spirit. So he says the purpose of the tent was to materialize breath to inform matter below. So the tent was both a host for spiritual principles and a transmitter of meaningful information. What you sow, so also shall you reap. Remember the story of Cain and Abel. One sacrificed properly and the other sacrificed incorrectly. One sacrifice was rewarded by God, the other was rejected. This is how life works, right? Every action, work, is either rewarded or rejected. It's kind of one of the harsh realities of our existence. And then we have Christ, the story of Christ. This is the ultimate version of this pattern, right? Christ reveals the ultimate version of this pattern of sacrifice in his life, death, descent into Hades, and the ascension. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God, right? That's the reward at the end there. He sacrificed his life in his work serving others, right? For those 33 years. And then he sacrifices his body on the cross, offers up matter, body, flesh, blood. And even in his descent into hell itself, he continues to work, sacrifice, by delivering the good news of the kingdom of heaven, even in the realm of death and Hades itself. And the result is this sacrifice of body, this offering up of not only body, but of attention, of work, of energy. And the result is the descending of the Spirit, which we see throughout the scriptures, throughout the New Testament, but especially in Acts. The descending of the Spirit into the world, the joining of heaven and earth in that way. And this ultimately results in the ascension of Christ into heaven, to the very top of the hierarchy, enthroned with God at the right hand of God and above all things, ruling all things, right? This ultimate sacrifice results in the ultimate embodiment or fulfillment of the ruler archetype. Lastly, the process of sacrifice can be dangerous. It is dangerous, right? Because like the high priest entering into the Holy of Holies, you're attempting to interact with the highest in some way. So just take into consideration that pattern for a moment, or that part of the pattern. You have the high priest entering into the Holy of Holies. Now he has to go through this entire complex ritual of purification. And if he does this ritual incorrectly, he's going to die. They literally tie a rope to him and bells so that when he walks into the Holy of Holies, they can hear him jingling. And if he stops jingling, it's kind of morbid, but kind of funny in a way. It's not funny, but if he stops jingling, then they pull him out, right? Because he didn't fulfill his duty properly. He didn't fulfill this version of sacrifice properly, or this part of the pattern of sacrifice. At the level of the individual, just consider the work that you do and what it adds up to. Remember, work is sacrificing for the future. And if you do your work incorrectly, if you don't do enough work, or if you do it improperly or in the wrong way or inefficiently, what that adds up to ultimately is what? Your destiny, the outcome of your life, that your character, who you become, is determined by your actions, by your work, by your routines, by your habits. But if you do them correctly, if you do your work correctly, the reward is great. Something from above, right? The scriptures say, every good gift comes from above, from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting of shadows, right? That's a bit paraphrased, but that's the gist of it. So when you sacrifice correctly, when you work correctly, that which is at the top of the hierarchy will descend to your level, join with you, bringing gifts of insight, revelation, divine knowledge, secret knowledge, and many other gifts besides, right? This can take the form of financial gifts, right? Wealth, physical health, right? You put in the effort, sacrificing your time and your energy by going to the gym and working out and disciplining yourself and eating the right foods and not eating too much of the wrong foods or too much food in general. The result, of course, is going to be a good thing, that is wealth in the form of health, physical health. So like that high priest entering into the Holy of Holies, you're attempting to interact with something higher than you, whether we're speaking metaphysically or psychologically, right? This is true. And there are monstrous guardians between you and the sacred, right? Something like dragons guarding the treasure, the cherubim guarding the secret knowledge and the sacred from profanation. Okay, so you can see this pattern in the legend of Saint Christopher, the dog-headed saint. This is pretty cool. Jonathan Peugeot speaks on this in a couple of his videos. It's very interesting. But you see in his story, the pattern of sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice in the end, is when he is crossing over the rivers. He's bringing people across the waters. He's carrying them across the waters because he's giant, he's strong, he's big and he's strong. And ultimately, what that ends up becoming is the ultimate form of service or sacrifice, which is carrying Christ himself across the river. What's really interesting about crossing the waters, crossing the rivers, is oftentimes in these legends, in the scriptures, in mythology, a crossing of the water oftentimes ends in the ascension into heaven, right? And this actually happens in the story of Christopher as well. He gets to the other side with the Christ after almost dying, and he says, "Why on earth were you so heavy?" And the child says, "Well, I was bearing the weight of the world on my shoulders." And in some versions he says, "Well, because I was carrying the entire world on my shoulders. You know, you did all right." And he renames Saint Christopher, who was named something else before that. And he says, "You are now Christopher, Christ bearer." And in this process, even though he's seeking after what he thinks is the highest truth, and he gets it wrong over and over again, right? He serves Satan, he serves the king of Gilgamesh, or whatever it is. But ultimately, in his search of the highest truth, he actually finds the highest truth. He actually finds the most powerful being in the universe and the highest form of truth, or you could say Christ found him, right? And he has this joining of heaven and earth, right? Of this embodying of the Logos as he carries the Christ across the waters, and Christ ends up ascending into heaven. And you could say the same or something of the sort happens with Christopher as well, as he becomes sanctified, he becomes saved, and even a saint. And then in the legends of Alexander the Great, right, there's two really interesting legends. One about an eye having to do with attention, and another having to do with griffins. Again, these hybrids, these guardians of the sacred. In the longer version of this, I'm going to go into in depth on that. But for now, for this short version, all you need to know is that the pattern of sacrifice is in those stories, and it's very fascinating, very interesting. And really, the moral of these stories is that unhealthy desire, kind of like Pandora's box, Pandora's jar, technically, or Eve's temptation in the garden with the fruit. Unhealthy desire is the cause of evil and suffering and death in the world. And this concept is everywhere you look. Virtually every culture, every civilization has some version of this truth. Desire is the cause of suffering, right? Unhealthy desire, that is. But healthy desire, healthy ambition, is good when it's aimed properly toward the Logos. You're aimed at the highest. When you're aimed at the best thing, the highest things, the Logos, your work is transmuted into gifts from heaven. You sow seeds of good and thus reap a harvest of good things. But again, it has to be done properly in a pure, authentic, correct manner, right? Or the creatures of chaos, the terrifying, surreal, hybrid monsters of heaven will tear you apart, or perhaps more accurately, will cut you into pieces with a flaming sword, like the cherubim guarding the Garden of Eden. And if your sacrifice is good, these guardians may reveal, allow access to, or even help you get the treasures of good, the treasures of heaven, that is, every truly good thing.